Sylvie touched on a little bit. I wondered, Robby, if you had any thoughts about Rojava and Oshawott and kind of that.
Well, I mean, I always push, in my mind, I'm always thinking toward a better world or a better way to understand things. And I'd say to myself, if I was there, I wouldn't just read one guy's writings or just recite any one person's stuff. I mean, even if you agree with some of Murray Bookchin, you have to, kind of wonder, is he the only anarchist that ever lived? Actually, I don't know that they know he's an anarchist, but regardless,
it's Akeland who they constantly cite.
That's what I mean. No, what I'm saying is they don't cite Bookchin themselves. They just have the retail version from him, and so then you kind of wonder, if we're making a free society, why aren't we making our own theory or making our own ideas? We're just kind of repeating somebody else's, but it's really a hard decision. I'm not going to actually take a super hard line and condemn, and say don't support them because they're not perfect, but just fervently hope that they learn more and more. But I must say, as I keep reading, I don't sense them taking in more things. More people are going there. You see more and more reports of anarchists who go there and come back and talk about it, but you don't get an impression that, for example, do any of these mass meetings that equally include men and women actually discuss concretely things other than Ocalan.
Oh yeah, they discuss all the local.
No, I mean in terms of ideas. I understand they have structure that they claim is much better than what they had before. Yeah, I guess we're always on the spot as far as support or non-support, critical support.
Yeah, we don't want to be duped or betrayed by another revolution. But
yeah. Well, I mean that's like what
revolution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's like what happened in Algeria. It became a military dictatorship, and like a lot of the people actually helped support the military, and he looked the other way when the civilian Algerians were killed off by the military rivals and stuff like that. And how do you understand what a situation, or like what you had said about Russia, after the fall of the wall and the crumbling of the Soviet Union, a lot of the people who would consider themselves anarchists were outmaneuvered. A lot of them had very strong feelings about what they would like to see happen, but didn't know how, and I'm not sure I would have known how, to deal with the situation, to be able to push back against the authoritarian capitalists who took over.
Well, you can even look here right now. We're in a potentially explosive social situation, and I don't know why we're not going to be. I think we're very likely to be outmaneuvered if people don't get together and start thinking more about like what they want individually and as a group, and work out some framework of understanding, not just a way to talk to the media, but to talk to each other, to talk to ourselves. I think there's a lot of good stuff, a lot of good potential in the background, things that you can read in Crime Think or in the Fifth Estate. It's not like it's an intellectual desert here. We have lots of ideas, and people have actually learned a lot about history, the lessons of history. So, but it'll be a big plus when people start, concentrating more on what might be necessary to keep from being outflanked. But in other words, the situation can get worse and worse, and a lot of people, as they say, are in motion. People are going to find real reasons to revolt, and so wouldn't it be nice if we could have something that goes in the right direction for a change?
I was wondering if, either of you had any stories or examples of ways that anti-authoritarians or anarchists have responded to moments of repression and arrests, jail support, things like that?
Well, I know that in the 70s here, I wasn't here, but I've been told by lots of people, when there were the grand jury investigation, particularly during the second one later in the 70s, there were a lot of several young single mothers who were called before the grand jury and who refused to testify, to give information about different radical activity in this area, and by getting together they were able to withstand it. But in both cases, and in lots of other cases, it seems like really hard for people to hold together after that. There's a lot of people sort of slow down and step back for a while, and they come back, but the repression is like a really scary thing for most of us. So I think the history has been that there have been some people who were very stalwart despite the repression, and then some people who get very scared and disappear for a few years and then come back, and then some people who disappear and you never see them again. Mm-hmm. So it's just really hard. I guess that's one of the reasons that I find people like Federico Arcos, who just died, and his partner who died in the 90s, poor Arco, really neat people, because of the fact that they not only were involved in the Spanish Revolution, but that they continued to fight against the Francoist regime afterwards. Mm-hmm. And Federico actually going into the mountains in the anti-Franco fight for a while, and Pura, even right after the defeat, continuing to do prison support from inside Spain for a few years.
And it was dangerous for them. They risked their lives doing it.
Yeah, they could have been killed, and so several of their friends were. So it's really difficult. So like after '68, there was this big upsurge, and everybody hoped that things would go much further than they did. I knew at least 20 people who committed suicide after things sort of calmed down. There were still things happening. I mean, there were several strikes of different sorts that we considered could be really significant, but the high pitch, the very hopeful tone of what was going on in '68 in so many parts of the world sort of died back, and some people just became despairing, and some people dropped out. A lot of people didn't, a lot more than their claim didn't, but there were people, I'm sure there were more than 20. These are just people who I knew who committed suicide. So I think it's not really easy, although there are definitely, people who continued and didn't allow things to depress them. But I guess it's like the co-ops, the small co-op, the different projects, the printing projects, the theater and stuff. That's the way I think that generally people have gotten through the repressive time, by different creative activities like that. What'd you say?
Yeah. So like the printing co-op would publish information to remind people about the good times and about the revolutionary times, stuff.
But also it was something to do.
Yeah, right.
That's something
no,
that you would...
the content served the form. The form was doing things together, but it wasn't just like bridge parties. It was, doing revolutionary literature, something,
But also it was like something you could do that wasn't being in the streets.
Yeah, right.
You know, but that still had some significance to it.
And then really, like around here, that's when Books to Prisoners started in the early 70s.
Did
Still
Books to
going
Prisoners start before Left Bank?
No, around the same time. I think.
Yeah, I think it did it at 73,
Yeah.
but there were a lot of little co-ops around here too, and a lot of cooperative exchanges between all the little co-ops, different small scale things.
Like the people in Left Bank have stories where they tell they would just trade books for everything, food, you know, like haircuts or bread. There were so many co-ops all over that they had this informal network where I remember even when we first came here, they would get people who bring pizza, different things from the other co-ops, you know. So that was a thing that really worked for a while.
And were you two involved in the beginning of Left Bank, or you came in?
Not the very beginning. We knew them at the
From
time. Yeah, we knew them when we were in New York. It started.
We knew them before. We knew them
That's
in
one reason we came here.
late 60s, 70s, but
Yeah.
we didn't come here till 81. So Left Bank started earlier than that. But we've talked with a lot of the people who were in on the beginning, both formally and informally.
We moved in with them.
Yeah,
When
when
we
we
came
first
here.
came to Seattle, we were invited to stay in the group house. There was 9 people, and I guess 8 out of 9 were involved in Left Bank. One person wasn't.
I think things could be a lot worse now, even though people individually don't feel real upbeat after the times of the 2010 to 2013. But there's still a lot of, there's still anarchist Black Cross, and people aren't stopping. So maybe they just need to keep doing or do more of the same, you know, do like what you're doing is great. Just pick it up and then something will come from that.
Kind of a related question. I've just known a lot of people that were anarchists in their 20s and then sort of stopped. And I was just wondering if you had anything to say about how you managed to remain anarchist for so long.
I didn't become an anarchist till I was 40.
Oh,
There's the trick, see? Tell them, don't bother when you're 20. Keep skateboarding till you're 40.
But you mean you didn't call yourself
Oh,
that?
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I guess my answer is I didn't see any choice, actually. I don't know. It's really hard for me to say. I do know that there's a lot more people around who are our age and in their 60s and 50s who have remained anti-authoritarian in one way or another, although they might not be involved in the same projects that they were involved in the past, but who come out when there are big things happening. I guess, part of it, I think, is what draws you to it. So, it's really, this is not a judgment, but it's very hard for me to understand people who come to anarchism from, let's say, the punk music scene or something. Whereas I came to it for social, economic reasons, so that's why. It's not that I don't like music, but it wasn't music that drew me to it. I don't know why, people don't stick around, but it may be that those people who don't stick around will turn up later again, It may very well be that you'll see them again at some point. But it also is like, what kind of alternatives do people have? Are they, why were they involved, and what do they think? Were they involved because they thought there was going to be a big victory, and once there was no big victory, they're looking for something else, or what was it that they were involved in? And I don't know. I think it's really hard to say because it's obviously different for different people. There are some people who sort of flake off because they've gone and had children. And some people say, well, kids take up a lot of your time. But then I also know some people who had children and stuck with it, and continue to be involved. And I think it's also true that people aren't going to always be involved in the same way. So I'm not going to be running in the streets the way I was in my 20s and my 30s because, first of all, I don't see now and I used to see them. But secondly, I think I wouldn't necessarily feel that I'm in a good position to do that. And I'm not always sure whether those kinds of demonstrations will result in a whole lot after they're over, because I was through a lot of them and it came out the other side and they didn't. But I'm not the person to say don't have those demonstrations, because I know that sometimes they could lead to something that I wouldn't expect too. So, but I don't know. I guess it depends on a whole bunch of things, but also that you can't tell. I mean, wait until you're 50 and see who came around with the next insurgency. You know what I'm saying?
We went to the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Fifth Estate in Detroit. There were hundreds of people there, from our age on down. So then in talking to them, you see they're doing lots of interesting things, even if they're not in any particular anarchistic thing. Like one guy I was talking to, who I didn't know him personally, but because of working on the archives, I know what he wrote in the 60s. He came back and he counsels. He's a psychological counselor for vets in Detroit. So he's still an anarchist. He's just not like making that history directly. I think there's a big difference between people who actually fade or people who actually turn around and become authoritarians. And I think there's not many. I think, as I think back about the ones that I knew, who I know a little bit now, very few of them are basically different people. They're just in different parts of their lives, and some of it might be different if the surrounding conditions were different, if there was some more that they could get involved in actual ongoing revolt, what to revolt against, I guess.
Well, even in terms of like different activities, so I know somebody who was involved in the student activities in Montreal a few years ago, and she visited here in Seattle, and she talked about how tired people got doing different things and having to take care of so many different functions of what was going on with the rebellion. And so I asked her, said, well, did you think of like enlisting some people who might not be in the streets to help with some of the other stuff, getting them involved in a way that, respectful, meaningful way? And she said, no. So all of the people like who are doing some of these things, if people aren't going to push themselves forward, they may feel like they're not necessarily welcome. I think Robby and I, maybe, we show up a lot of places that other people our age or a little younger wouldn't, because they don't feel welcome. And why did we? Because we're very interested to see what's going on, and if people are welcoming to us, we're very happy, and if they're not, we could be a little unhappy about it. But there are some people who feel like, oh, no one's going to want to talk to me. They're all only in their 20s. They don't care about somebody like me. So that, I think that's the problem. And also, like, in terms of music is a very funny thing, because before like the 50s and 60s, there wasn't necessarily that big a difference between what different generations liked for music. But now there's a really big difference. So lots of times when there's parties, there'll only be certain kinds of music playing that I'm not totally enthusiastic about. So I might go to talk to some of the people, but not stay around for all the music, because I'm not that excited by it. And I have said to people in different places, like at Left Bank, why don't you have a party with a variety of music, so so that for different generations, so we can mix it all up, and that's not as interesting, or nobody comes around, why should we do that? So it's I think there's a few different reasons, but some people drift away because there's different things happening in their lives, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they stop being anarchists or anti-authoritarians. And some people drift away because they feel like as they get older that they're less and less part of the social scene. And so there's a few different aspects that probably things could be made a little more integrated. Like, that's the nice thing about a lot of the older cultures, like the Spanish anarchists and the Italian anarchists, and some of the earlier anarchists here in this country too, where they made it a point to have dinners every month, and different social events that people of different generations were involved in. When Robby and I were in New York, I don't know what it's like now, but when you used to go to the Libertarian Forum once a month, and there would be kind of discussions, somebody would give a talk, and then there would be discussion, and there would be people of several generations there, and then you could talk to the people, and get to know different people that way, because it was a context that people who were older and younger could both feel comfortable in. So I think that happens less here now, not just Seattle. Maybe it happens a little more in San Francisco, although since I haven't been there a whole lot, it's hard for me to say whether. I don't think it happens in Detroit right now, or the Detroit area right now, that there's a lot of different contexts where people of different generations come together.
I was wondering if any of you wanted to talk more about your involvement in Fifth Estate and some of the history of that.
So let's see. Currently, we're both part of the editorial collective, and like Sylvie said before, we have been reading it since it started being a radical paper in the 70s. We're trying to keep it on a high level, it's good ideas and nice presentation, and we're hoping that people will keep it going, in different forms, as time goes on, different groups of people can take it over.
You have one copy. We don't have the copies to give away yet, but we have this most recent issue that just came out. It has an article by Peter Gilderloos about the Spanish groups in Catalonia who are working on developing solidarity actions, what he calls anarchist infrastructure. And maybe you've seen some of that stuff talked about, but and so we have a few, we're working to try and, we want to have people, different generations involved, because it's an interesting thing. It is a paper that has been around a long time and has a lot of people who subscribe to it, and also sometimes in some places like here we give some away, and it can have not all the articles anybody's going to be interested in, but it can have a variety of articles and even some different perspectives that make it possible to fill gaps that papers that might be more focused in one direction or another might not fill. And it's definitely not an academic journal. We're hoping, like Robby said, that young people will be involved too, and there are some young people who have been involved over the years, and that if it turns out in a few years that nobody cares, then it will stop. But it has gone 50 years, and it has a big connection, and people keep on writing letters about how they find it in libraries, or somebody, find back issues in one place or another, and they want to make comments on it, and they're really clear, enthusiastic about how that it's still going. So,
are back issues available?
Well, back issues, some are available and some people have. Yeah, there are some back issues available. The oldest ones we're putting online and they're not available in paper. But people have found issues that go back 10, 15, and 20 years. You know.
Little Black Cart sells some.
Yeah.
You can go on Little Black Cart and look for them.
Right. But people find them, like their friends find them in their collection and pass them around, or sometimes people find them in used bookstores and stuff like that too. Over the years, I have written several letters and articles for the Fifth Estate, some with my name and some with a variety of pseudonyms, which I used basically because I like the idea of people reading something for what it says rather than for who wrote it. Mm. And a lot of other people have written with pseudonyms as well as their own names too. So it's also like a little game. See what funny pseudonyms you can think of. So that's the other thing. But yeah, I guess there's a few things that we first of all decided we wanted to scan and put those things online because we wanted to be able to give people a fuller idea of what actually went on in the 60s and the 70s. And so we also scanned and proofread. Robby put online at least the first 3 issues of Black and Red that Freddy and Lorraine and some other people put out, which came out was before the Fifth Estate. But
it's in the Anarchist Library.
Yeah, it's in the Anarchist Library under Black and Red. But I have been annoyed for a really long time about this anarchist academic perspective about how there really weren't very many anarchists around, and most of them were pacifists, and they're the ones that really laid the groundwork for the modern anarchist movement. Makes me want to throw something.
Yeah, what is it called? Propose and...
Oh, that Andrew Cornell wrote, Propose or Propose, yeah.
Yeah, propose and depose, yeah.
Yeah.
And that was his whole thing. And what is that the one that talks about the New American Movement?
Yeah, Movement for a New Society. I vaguely remember hearing something about them, but they certainly were not particularly influential. He liked them, and
it's the only group he knows about.
Well, he even admits there were only really 200, but he wants to say, oh well, they influenced, and the Quakers influenced the civil rights movement, and they influenced this and that. And yes, to a certain extent, but they weren't the only ones. It's a lot more complex than that, I think. So, like, I like what Jesse Cohn talks about in Underground Passages, the different cultural and social political activities of anti-authoritarians and anarchists.
Have either of you seen that? Underground Passages?
No, I don't think I have.
It's really worth looking at.
Yeah,
you got it right there, huh?
Well, here it is. Okay. I like that book. And I don't like all books, but I like that one anyway. It's interesting because it doesn't classify just as anarchists, but it talks a lot about anarchism as something that has a stream that runs through
cultural resistance.
Yeah, cultural, but it's not the whole story. But yeah, so anyway, so there's 2 things, and then also I wanted to have things scanned more so that more people with visual impairments could read the Fifth Estate, which I think has had some very good stuff. But if somebody didn't read it to them, they couldn't have read the earlier Fifth Estate or even now. And so I wanted to be able to make that available because there's a lot of people with disabilities of different sorts who primarily are exposed to right-wing and religious stuff. And I think it's not very fair, to say the least. So I decided I wanted to do that also. It's not the only reason, and it's not the main reason that I have been involved in, associating with those people, but I really felt like there should be more visibility of different projects. So there are some other things that have been put online, like Anarcho-Syndicalist Review, but first of all, it doesn't go back as far, and secondly, it's more narrow than the Fifth Estate. The Fifth Estate has had stuff by anarcho-syndicalists, has had stuff by anarcho-primitivists, and has had stuff by postmodernists and a whole bunch of different kinds of anarchists. So it's much broader than, let's say, Anarcho-Syndicalist Review or The Open Road, which I think has had some stuff put up, but it's really not easily accessible, and it's also, in its own way, a little more narrow. And it doesn't have the same time period. It doesn't go back as far, and it's not as broad as the Fifth Estate. So because the main thing is the Fifth Estate had a lot of different participants.
Yeah, I was going to say the interesting thing about the Fifth Estate is it's a group of people that evolved over time as they got exposed to different ideas.
That's true too.
Came out with like new ideas. And some magazines, most magazines, just have one thrust, one tendency that you can see over and over again. But if you look over time with the Fifth Estate, it started out as a pretty diverse group, and some of them were, I don't know what you call them, Groucho Marxists, kind of zany, kind of into revolt for sure, but really, having fun doing it, and that you see that a lot in the early issues. Then it gets more serious. Then it goes into criticisms of civilization, criticisms of organization, different things they take up over time.
Yeah, and then when, like in the 2000s, when it first moved to Pumpkin Hollow and those people, Sent Frog and those others were involved, it was much more cultural kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. I think over time there's been at least 1,000, maybe more, people involved in not just writing articles for the Fifth Estate, but working on doing editing stuff and art. A lot of different artists have contributed to their artwork to it also. It's always had poetry and sometimes short stories and stuff in it too. And not the dullest of stuff. I mean, not like socialist realism, poetry and short stories.
So now there's more than 1,200 articles online in the archive. Person can search. You can search any name or anything you want to read about.
And we're still scanning and proofreading, and Robby is still putting up more.
I wonder if we could do any of them for the audio scene.
You mean read them?
Yeah.
Of course. Anyone would love to.
I mean, obviously we could, but I'm wondering if there are any that would jump out at you that you recommend.
One of my favorites that I've told people is this one about propaganda discovered in Detroit. That's sort of a play, actually. It's sort of like a play. It's just, if you just look up propaganda